Nancy had a dog living, and one of the neighbors has said that the dog died in December. Nancy and this dog lived in this house, and they apparently didn't have any issues.
I want you to think about something. If you were planning to enter an 84-year-old woman's home in the middle of the night, and you had been watching her for weeks, maybe months, what would you need to neutralize first? The cameras. The suspect covered the doorbell camera with branches, then disabled it entirely, removed it from the mount, the connectivity. Investigators began asking neighbors weeks after the abduction whether they had noticed internet outages that night. One neighbor's Ring camera history came back marked not available for the overnight hours, a glitch that family had never seen before and described to investigators as uncanny. A damaged utility box found around the corner from Nancy's home is now under active investigation, the hearing. Retired FBI agent Jim Clemente, reviewing the case, noted publicly that Nancy suffered from hearing loss significant enough to require powerful hearing aids during the day. Aids she almost certainly would have removed before going to bed, which made her, in his words, significantly more vulnerable to anyone who entered in the dark.
Who's fixated on her because she's the mother of a celebrity.
You take out the cameras, you take out the connectivity, you take out the hearing, you walk through a door at 2:28 in the morning when a pacemaker stops talking to its devices, and you take a woman from her bed. But here is what nobody has asked. What about the dog? If you have been with us throughout this series, you already know Nancy Guthrie's home almost like you have stood in front of it yourself. Catalina Foothills, one of the most affluent neighborhoods in Tucson, Arizona, the kind of neighborhood where people have lived in the same house for 30 years, where neighbors know each other by name, where Jeff Lamy, the neighbor 4 doors down, described the worst crime he could remember as someone going through mailboxes, maybe a decade ago.
Just hello, just niceties when walking the dog. She had a dog at one time.
She had a
black terrier.
A black terrier,
yeah.
okay. And you have
Nancy had lived in Tucson for more than 5 decades. She was 84 years old, born in Fort Wright, Kentucky in January 1942, a woman of deep faith. Her family has said she would not miss a Sunday church service. That is precisely how the disappearance was first noticed. She did not show up for church on the morning of February 1st, 2026. Her 3 adult children, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron, went to the house. At 11:56 in the morning, they confirmed their mother was gone. At 12:03, the family called 911. What investigators found inside that home changed this from a missing persons case into a federal kidnapping investigation within hours. Blood on the porch confirmed as Nancy's. A masked suspect on doorbell camera footage. Armed, wearing gloves, carrying a backpack. The camera physically tampered with. Evidence of a violent entry. Nancy's phone was still in the house. Her purse, her medications, her primary hearing aids, everything that tells you a person meant to come back, still sitting in that house. Everything that tells you she did not walk out on her own. Since then, this case has drawn international attention. FBI Director Kash Patel released surveillance images personally. President Trump stated he was deploying all available resources. The Guthrie family offered a $1 million reward. The combined reward, family and FBI, now stands at $1.1 million. As of today, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. What concerns us in this video is not the investigation you have already seen covered in the news cycle. It is the detail that almost nobody covered, the one that lives in the space between when the planning started and when the cameras stopped working. The dog. This detail did not come from a conspiracy theory. It did not come from an internet forum. It came from Nancy's actual neighbor, a man who walked past her house every single day, Jeff Lamy. He lives 4 doors down from Nancy in the Catalina Foothills. He appeared on CNN in the first days after the disappearance, telling anchor Aaron Burnett that the neighborhood was in a state of shock. He described Nancy as someone he would see every day while walking his own dogs.
Just niceties when walking the dog. She had a dog at one time.
She had a
black terrier.
A black terrier,
yeah.
okay.
And
you have
2 Papillons.
Papillons, yeah.
And in that interview, in one sentence that most people did not pick up on, he mentioned that Nancy had lived alone since her own dog had died. He did not elaborate. The interview moved on, but then came March 2nd, 2026, Joel Waldman, an Emmy Award-winning journalist and host of the true crime podcast Surviving the Survivor, Best Guess in True Crime, hosted a 90-minute episode dedicated to the Guthrie case. His guests included retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb, retired Pima County Sheriff's Department lieutenant, and former SWAT commander Bob Kiergy, and Jeff Lamy himself. And during that episode, in response to a direct question, Jeff Lamy described the dog. It was a little black terrier, Lamy said. We would see it sometimes in the past with her in the front yard. But we had learned, as I had mentioned, we had seen a bit less of her lately, and we learned that her dog had passed away. Waldman, the podcast host, noted during the episode that the dog reportedly died in December 2025. Nancy was taken on the night of January 31st, 2026, 30 to 60 days. That is the gap between when that dog stopped being alive and when Nancy Guthrie was pulled from her home in the early hours of the morning. Let that sit. Bob Kiergy is not a commentator. He is not an internet theorist. He is a retired lieutenant from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the same department investigating this case, and a former SWAT commander. When this man talks about what it takes to enter someone's home at 1 a.m. without being detected, he is speaking from a career spent doing exactly the opposite, stopping people who try. Joel Waldman asked him directly on the March 2nd podcast. A former SWAT commander knows a little black terrier is not going to stop an armed operative. But if you are conducting an operation, if you have planned this thing and you hear a dog, could that have changed the outcome? Kiergy's answer was unambiguous. I don't think it's a ridiculous notion at all, he said. When someone is doing something like this, the last thing they want is attention, especially in that moment. And then he explained why. So having that little yapping dog or a big, strong, barking dog, that's going to draw attention. That's going to get Jeff's attention a few houses down, especially at 1 o'clock in the morning. Anything like that is an advantage. It's something to make the bad guy feel uncomfortable and hopefully more likely to say, I don't need this right now, and get in their car and drive away. Read that back. That's going to get Jeff's attention a few houses down. Jeff Lamy, 4 doors away, the same neighbor who confirmed the dog was already gone by the time the abduction happened, if that terrier had been alive on the night of January 31st. If it had been doing what small dogs do at 1 a.m. when something moves outside, Jeff might have heard it. He might have looked out his window. He might have called 911. The entire operation might have collapsed before it started. And the man saying this is a former SWAT lieutenant from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Now, I want to ask you something. If you were planning this and you knew about the dog, what would you do? Let's slow down and look at this case from a different angle. Not the angle of what happened the night Nancy was taken, the angle of what was removed before it happened. Because here is what strikes any serious investigator about the Guthrie abduction. Almost every natural alarm system that existed in or around that house was either bypassed, disrupted, or simply gone before the suspect ever set foot on the property. Start with the cameras. Nancy had multiple cameras at her home, motion-activated cameras covering the pool area, the backyard, and the side yard. And the most important one, the doorbell camera at the front entrance. The FBI released footage showing the suspect physically tampering with that camera, placing branches in front of the lens to obscure it, ultimately removing the device itself. And yet the FBI was still able to recover footage from that doorbell camera, even though the device was physically missing and Nancy did not have a cloud subscription. That recovery speaks to the level of digital forensics the FBI brought to bear. But the intent of the tampering was clear: eliminate the visual record. Now the internet. Investigators returned to Nancy's neighborhood specifically to ask residents about internet disruptions on the night of January 31st. This is not speculation. Neighbors confirmed FBI agents came to their doors with exactly that question. Multiple homeowners reported their internet connections faltered during the overnight hours. One neighbor's Ring camera, history is marked not available from that night. A damaged utility box around the corner from Nancy's home, confirmed by the Pima County Sheriff's Department on March 8th, is under active investigation as a possible link to that outage. And on the doorbell camera footage, investigators have noted what appears to be an antenna-like device visible in the pocket of the masked figure. Now the hearing. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. Retired FBI Special Agent Jim Clemente confirmed what many had already assumed. Nancy wore powerful hearing aids during the day and almost certainly removed them before going to sleep at night. In the early hours of February 1st, with a tampered camera, with a potentially disrupted internet connection, an 84-year-old woman who could not hear clearly was asleep in her bed. 3 active security systems, cameras, internet, hearing, all 3 required specific knowledge, equipment, or planning to address. All 3 required someone who had studied this house, knew the camera positions, knew the telecommunications infrastructure, knew Nancy's daily habits. Now consider the dog. A dog requires none of that. A dog cannot be jammed, cannot be disabled remotely, cannot be bypassed with a backpack full of equipment. A dog is a biological alarm system that responds to sound, to smell, to the presence of a stranger. It is the one thing on this list that, if someone was watching this house for weeks before the abduction, they would have known about. They would have watched that little black terrier in the front yard. They would have done the same math Bob Kiergy did. They would have understood it was a problem. And here's the question this video is built around. The dog died in December. Was that a coincidence or was that a solution?
Nancy's dog dies in December, according to the neighbor. Does anyone know for a fact that this dog died in December other than what the...
Before I walk through the specifics of how someone might eliminate a dog without raising suspicion, I want to spend some time in the mind of whoever planned this operation, because the more you study the mechanics of what happened the night Nancy disappeared, the clearer it becomes that someone planned this with extraordinary care. Think about the reconnaissance this would have required. The Catalina Foothills neighborhood is not a random location. You do not accidentally end up on this street at 1 in the morning. The suspect, or suspects, knew exactly which house they were going to. They knew the property layout well enough to identify the specific cameras. They knew the front entrance well enough to position themselves for tamper and removal. They knew where the doorbell camera was. They knew to bring branches to obstruct the lens before disabling the device. When the FBI asked neighbors to submit any footage they considered out of the ordinary, the request covered January 1st through February 2nd, 1 full month before the abduction. That month-long window tells you something about how investigators are thinking about the surveillance period that preceded the operation. Now think about what a month of surveillance looks like in practice. You are watching a house. You are doing it from different positions at different times of day, from different vehicles. You are building a picture. Who comes and goes, what hours she keeps, when the lights go off, when the neighborhood goes quiet, what cameras exist and where they are positioned, what telecommunications infrastructure is nearby, when she leaves for church on Sunday. And during that month, somewhere in the process of building that picture, you would have seen the dog, a little black terrier in the front yard with Nancy, exactly as Jeff Lamy had seen it, from 4 doors away over years of living on that street. A dog is not an afterthought in any serious entry planning. In tactical environments, military, law enforcement, criminal, the question of whether animals are present on a property is one of the first questions asked in any approach briefing, because animals cannot be controlled, cannot be predicted, cannot be negotiated with. A dog reacts to scent before a human crosses a threshold. It processes sound frequencies humans cannot hear. It wakes at 2 in the morning for reasons that cannot be explained and cannot be planned around. A competent surveilling planner running reconnaissance on Nancy Guthrie's home over a period of weeks would have flagged that dog the moment they saw it. They would have flagged it as a problem. And sometime in December, the problem was gone. I want to be very clear about what I am and am not saying. I am not saying Nancy Guthrie's dog was poisoned. There is no evidence confirming that. No toxicology has been released. No vet records have been made public. No law enforcement source has suggested this in any official capacity. I am asking a question, and the reason I am asking it is because of what has not been said. Nobody has explained how that dog died. Not the family, not law enforcement, not the OID. Pima County Sheriff's Department, not the FBI, not a single press conference in more than 44 days of intensive saturation level media coverage has addressed the cause of death of Nancy Guthrie's little black terrier. And in the context of everything else we know about this case, the surveillance, the systematic planning, the methodical removal of every other obstacle, that silence is worth examining. So let's talk about how this would work. Poisoning a small dog is, from a purely technical standpoint, not difficult. This is documented extensively in veterinary and forensic literature. Small dogs are particularly susceptible to common toxins: antifreeze, xylitol found in certain sugar-free products, rat poison derivatives, specific human medications administered in sufficient quantity, certain plants. Any of these, delivered in an appropriate amount, can kill a small dog within hours or days. More importantly, unless a veterinarian actively suspects poisoning and specifically orders a toxicology screen, it will very often not be detected. A small elderly dog belonging to an elderly owner, when it dies, the natural assumption is natural causes: old age, heart failure, a sudden decline. The owner, grieving, does not necessarily question it. The veterinarian, in the absence of clinical red flags, may not order additional testing. The body is cremated or buried, and whatever physical evidence may have existed is gone. This is not a hypothetical risk. The FBI formally added animal cruelty to the National Incident-Based Reporting System in 2016, specifically because law enforcement data had consistently shown a relationship between violence toward animals and subsequent violence toward people. FBI behavioral analysts who study predatory crimes have documented this escalation pattern. The deliberate targeting of a victim's pet as a means of control, intimidation, or obstacle removal has appeared in case records involving stalking, domestic homicide, and targeted violence. Now adapt that framework to a kidnapping operation. If you had been watching Nancy Guthrie's home for weeks and you identified the dog as a primary operational obstacle, you would need to eliminate it in a way that killed the animal, did not alarm the owner or the neighborhood, did not draw law enforcement attention, and left no trace that could ever be connected to you. A poisoning in late December, attributed to natural causes, to old age, to an unexplained sudden illness, accomplishes all four of those objectives simultaneously. The dog is gone. The owner is grieving but not suspicious. The neighborhood is unaware. Nobody calls the police. Nobody asks why. And 4 to 6 weeks later, you execute your operation in a house that is now silent at 1 a.m. I'm not saying that is what happened. I'm saying that if someone was planning this, that is exactly how they would have planned it. Let's spend some time on the timeline because I think it has been under-examined. The dog reportedly died in December 2025. Nancy Guthrie was taken on the night of January 31st, 2026. That is a gap of somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks, depending on exactly when in December the dog died. We do not know the specific date. Jeff Lamy did not give one. Joel Waldman did not provide one. It was reported as December 2025, and that is what we have: 4 to 8 weeks. Now think about what that window communicates in 2 different scenarios. In the scenario where the dog's death was entirely unrelated to the abduction, where it died of natural causes, where the timing was coincidental, you would expect no logical pattern to the gap. The dog might have died in September, in the summer, a year earlier. The timing would be arbitrary because the events would be unrelated. But in the scenario where the dog's death was connected to the planning of the abduction, where it was removed as a strategic obstacle, the timing becomes almost algorithmically precise. Here is the reasoning. You need the dog gone far enough in advance that the death does not raise suspicion by proximity. If the dog dies in the final days before the abduction, the risk increases. Even to a grieving 84-year-old woman, even to a neighbor who is not thinking like an investigator, there is a chance that someone makes a connection after the fact. People talk. A vet calls to check in, a neighbor mentions it to a reporter, but if the dog dies 4 to 8 weeks prior, it recedes, it becomes part of the background grief of the house. Nancy had time to mourn. Jeff knew. Life moved on. Nobody was still talking about the dog by the time February arrived. And you also need the dog gone close enough to the operation that Nancy has not had time to replace it. An 84-year-old woman who loved that little black terrier, if you give her enough time, she may get a new dog. If the animal died in August or September, there is a real possibility that by January, a new pet is in that house. A new alarm system, unplanned for, unaccounted for, dangerous to your operation. 4 to 8 weeks solves both problems simultaneously. Not long enough for questions, not long enough for a replacement, just long enough for the grief to settle and the house to go quiet. I am not saying that is what happened. I am saying that if someone planned this, that is exactly how they would have calibrated the timing. Here is the thing about this detail that I cannot stop coming back to. In the 44 plus days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared, this case has been covered by every major outlet in the country. CNN, Fox News, ABC, NBC, The New York Times, People Magazine, TMZ. International outlets covering it from the UK, Ireland, and beyond. Reporters have camped outside that house in the Catalina foothills. Retired FBI agents have appeared on podcast after podcast. Criminal lawyers have provided analysis across hundreds of hours of content. Former SWAT commanders have weighed in on the exact barking capabilities of small terriers at 1 in the morning. And in all of that, in every hour of coverage, every press briefing, every tip line update, not a single person in an official capacity has addressed the cause of death of Nancy Guthrie's dog. Not Sheriff Chris Nanos, not the FBI, not the Guthrie family's representatives. To be fair, and we must be, the family is in crisis. They are not obligated to provide veterinary documentation for a pet that died before any of this began. The grief of losing a beloved companion animal is private, and in the context of what happened to their mother weeks later, no reasonable person should be demanding the Guthrie family account for their mother's dog. But law enforcement is a different question. If you are conducting a forensic investigation into whether this abduction was premeditated, and every piece of evidence that has been made, public suggests it absolutely was. Then, the death of the primary natural alarm system at the property in the weeks directly preceding the operation is investigative information. It belongs in a forensic timeline. It warrants a quiet inquiry to whatever veterinarian last saw that dog, a request for records, a toxicology consult. A question, has that happened? We do not know. No official source has confirmed it. Has any official said it has not happened? Also, no. What we have is silence. And in an investigation that has been this publicly saturated, where the FBI director himself posted surveillance images to social media, where the Pima County Sheriff has held dozens of press conferences, the complete absence of any reference to the dog's death at any point in any public statement is something worth noting. The veterinary records, if they exist, would tell investigators a great deal. When did the dog present at the clinic? What were the presenting symptoms? What was the listed cause of death? Was a toxicology panel ordered? Was the animal's body cremated or buried? And if buried, is it in a location where exhumation and testing would be possible? These are answerable questions. Whether anyone in law enforcement has asked them, we genuinely do not know. What we know is that a former SWAT commander from the Pima County Sheriff's own department said, in plain language, that if that dog had been alive on the night of January 31st, 2026, the outcome of this case might have been completely different. And we know the dog was not alive. Let me show you what this case looks like when you step back far enough to see all of it at once. Someone knew that Nancy Guthrie lived alone in the Catalina foothills. Someone knew the specific address, the property layout, the camera positions. Someone knew that she wore hearing aids during the day and almost certainly removed them at night. Someone knew or discovered where the telecommunications infrastructure for that neighborhood was located. A utility box around the corner, accessible, vulnerable. Someone was watching that house for long enough that investigators requested a full month of neighborhood surveillance footage. The operation itself involved a masked suspect, armed, wearing gloves, carrying a backpack, moving in the early hours of the morning, the darkest, quietest window of the night. Nancy's pacemaker stopped syncing with connected devices at 2:28 in the morning. A car was captured on camera speeding through a neighborhood 2.5 miles away at 2:36. Just minutes after, multiple ransom demands followed, sent to media outlets demanding cryptocurrency payment. That is the picture of a premeditated, surveilled, financially motivated, carefully executed operation. Now put the dog back into that picture. A little black terrier, living in a house with an 84-year-old woman who kept predictable hours and slept with her. Hearing aids off, 4 doors down from a neighbor who walked his own dogs past that house every day. A dog that knew the normal sounds of that street the way any dog knows its home, intimately, completely, and would have reacted to anything abnormal. A dog that died in December. I keep returning to the same question. If you were building a forensic timeline of everything that had to be true for this operation to succeed, the cameras, the internet disruption, the hearing aids, the timing, the darkness, where does the dog fit? Because it fits. It fits the way every other element fits. It was there, and then it was not there, and no one had to deal with it on the night of January 31st, 2026. And the hardest version of this question, the one I want to leave you sitting with, is this. If someone was sophisticated enough to identify and systematically address every other layer of security around Nancy Guthrie's home, cameras, internet, hearing, are we genuinely supposed to believe they did not notice the dog? And if they did notice the dog, what did they do about it? As of this recording, Nancy Guthrie has been missing for more than 44 days. She is 84 years old. She has a heart condition and a pacemaker. She was taken without her medications. Every day that passes is a day the family does not have answers. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has refocused its resources to a dedicated detective team assigned solely to this case. The FBI's involvement spans multiple field offices, digital forensics units, and crisis negotiation specialists brought in from Quantico in the early days of the investigation. A combined reward of $1.1 million, $1 million from the Guthrie family, $100,000 from the FBI, remains on the table for information that leads to Nancy's recovery. The damaged utility box near Nancy's home remains under active review. The DNA collected from the property continues to be processed, mixed DNA from multiple contributors, still yielding no confirmed match in the National FBI database. The black gloves found 2 miles from the home, DNA on them traced to an unrelated restaurant employee. The backpack the suspect wore, the mask, the antenna-like device in the suspect's pocket, all being analyzed. A car speeding through a neighborhood 2.5 miles away at 2:36 in the morning on February 1st, still unidentified. And somewhere in Tucson, Arizona, in a veterinary record, or in the absence of one, there is a file about a little black terrier that died in December 2025. Nobody has spoken about it publicly. Maybe someone has asked about it privately. Maybe nobody has asked at all. That is a question only the investigators can answer. And if they are watching this video, and people in Tucson have been watching this channel, I want them to know this community is paying attention to every detail, including the ones that did not make the press conferences. Now I want to talk about the insider knowledge question, because in a lot of ways, the dog is the sharpest edge of that question. We have covered this angle in this series before, but the dog forces us back to it in a specific and uncomfortable way. Think carefully about what someone would have had to know to plan this operation. They needed to know that Nancy did not have a cloud subscription for her Nest doorbell camera. That is not information you find in a Google search. That is not something visible from the street. A Nest camera looks identical whether or not it is backed up to the cloud. The only way to know it is not backed up is to know the person who owns it or to know someone who does. They needed to know about her hearing aids, not just that she was elderly, not just that she might have some hearing difficulty. They needed to know specifically that she wore powerful enough hearing aids that their absence at night would render her significantly less able to detect quiet intrusion. That is the kind of detail you learn from being around someone, from family conversations, from a caregiver, from someone who had been inside that house. They needed to know her Sunday routine precisely enough to select the specific window between her Saturday dinner with Annie and her Sunday morning church service. They did not just know she was a church-going woman. They knew she would be alone in that house between approximately 10 in the evening and 10 in the morning. They knew that window down to the hour, and now, the dog. They needed to know the dog was gone. Because here is the thing. If you are an outsider conducting surveillance on a property, you can see a dog when it is present. You can factor it into your planning. But what you cannot do, what no amount of watching from a parked car can tell you, is confirm with certainty that the dog is permanently gone, that it has died, that it will not be there on the night you choose to move. A dog that is simply not visible on a given surveillance visit might be inside, might be at the vet, might be staying with a family member while Nancy is traveling. An outsider watching from the street cannot know the difference between a dog that is absent and a dog that is dead. But someone who knew Nancy could know. Someone who had a relationship with her, or with someone close to her, could know that the dog passed away in December, could know that the house was now empty of that particular variable, could pass that information on or act on it themselves. I am not pointing a finger at any individual. I am following the logic of what the evidence requires to be true. Every detail of this operation that we have examined in this series, in 8 videos now, points in the same direction. This was not a stranger who found Nancy Guthrie by accident. This was someone who knew her world. And the dog is the clearest illustration of why that matters. Because you only know the dog is gone if someone told you, or if you were the one who made it go. Let me walk you through what a proper investigative examination of this question would actually look like. Not speculation, procedure. When investigators are building a forensic timeline in a premeditated abduction case, every significant event that occurred in the weeks and months before the crime is potentially relevant. It does not matter how unrelated it looks on the surface. What matters is whether it intersects with the opportunity, means, or planning of what followed. The dog's death intersects with all 3. It affected opportunity, because a living dog would have been an obstacle to a silent early morning operation. Its absence created a window. It potentially reflects means, because poisoning a small dog is not a technically difficult act, and it leaves no obvious trace in the absence of a deliberately ordered toxicology screen, and it sits squarely inside the planning timeline. 6 weeks before the abduction, precisely within the window when investigators believed this operation was being reconnoitered and prepared, a forensic investigation into the dog's death would start with the vet. Most pet owners have a regular veterinary clinic. A clinic visit history for Nancy's terrier would tell investigators when the dog was last seen healthy, whether there were any emergency visits in December, what the attending vet recorded as the cause of death, and whether any toxicology was ordered. If the dog died at home without a clinic visit, that is also information, because it means no veterinary record exists, which closes one evidentiary door and opens a question about another. If the dog was buried rather than cremated, the remains are potentially recoverable. An animal necropsy combined with a toxicology panel can detect rodenticide compounds, ethylene glycol from antifreeze, certain medications, and a range of other substances, even weeks or months after death, depending on burial conditions and soil chemistry. This is standard forensic practice in cases where animal poisoning is suspected. The timeline mapping matters too. If a veterinary visit was scheduled, not an emergency, but a routine appointment at which the dog was observed to be unwell, investigators can cross-reference that date with any surveillance footage from the neighborhood. Any vehicle that appeared near the property in the days before the dog became ill that also appeared in the weeks before the abduction would be significant. None of this is science fiction. None of this is outside the capability of the investigative resources already deployed on this case. The FBI has digital forensics teams, laboratory resources, and the kind of multi-agency coordination that can move quickly when a lead is identified. The question is whether the dog has been identified as a lead, and the answer to that question, at least in public, is silence. There is one more dimension to this that I want to address before we close. Some people watching this will ask, if the dog was poisoned, why hasn't Nancy's family mentioned it? Wouldn't they have noticed? Wouldn't an elderly woman losing a beloved pet to a sudden, unexplained death have been alarmed by it? It is a fair question, and the answer is probably not. And here is why. When a small elderly dog dies suddenly, the default interpretation for the owner, for the vet, for the neighbors is that the animal's age has caught up with it. Small dogs do not have the same visible external warning signs as larger animals. Their decline can be rapid and appear entirely natural. An owner who notices her dog is lethargic, not eating, and declining quickly, who takes the dog to the vet and is told that the animal is failing, does not, in most circumstances, request a toxicology screen. There is no reason to. The dog is old dogs die. The vet manages comfort. The owner grieves. Nancy Guthrie had no reason in December 2025 to suspect that the death of her little black terrier had anything to do with anything sinister. The abduction had not happened yet. The surveillance had not been noticed. The suspect was not yet known to exist. She would have grieved her dog. She would have been quieter without it. She would have been lonelier, and she would have had no idea, none, that the death of that animal might have been the first move in a plan that would 6 weeks later take her from her home. That is the part that is hardest to sit with. Not the theory, not the question of whether it happened, but the image of an 84-year-old woman mourning the death of her little black terrier alone in her house in the Catalina foothills while somewhere, someone was timing their next move. Whether the dog's death was natural or deliberate, that image is true. That loneliness was real. That house got quieter in December in ways Nancy could not have fully understood. Here is where we land. We do not know if Nancy Guthrie's dog was poisoned. We do not know if its death was connected to the planning of her abduction. We do not know if anyone in law enforcement has pursued this as an investigative thread, and we do not know if they have ruled it out. What we know is the timeline. What we know is the planning. What we know is that a former SWAT commander from this very sheriff's department said plainly that if that dog had been alive on the night of January 31st, the outcome of this case might have been completely different. And what we know, the thing that every episode of this series keeps returning to, is that this did not happen randomly. This was planned. This was studied. This was executed by someone who knew what they were doing and had the patience to do it right. In a case built on planning, the dog belongs in the forensic picture. Its death happened in the planning window. Its absence benefited the operation. Its cause of death has never been publicly explained. Those are facts. The interpretation of those facts is where the question lives, and the question deserves an answer. If you have any information related to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, anything, no matter how unrelated it seems, please contact the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Tips are confidential. If you have any information about a veterinary visit in December 2025 connected to Nancy's home, anything that seemed unusual, anything that has been nagging at you, that tip line is open 24 hours a day. If this video raised a question you had been sitting with, share it. Every view helps keep this story alive, and Nancy Guthrie deserves every question asked and every silence broken. The rest of this series is here on the channel. If you are not subscribed, subscribe now, because we are not finished with this case, not until Nancy comes home.